So welcome. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. I am really particularly excited about today's webinar because I have had the benefit of a year's worth of Gillian's wisdom, knowledge, training, tools, and I know that on a personal level, I found my time with Gillian really, really transformative. So I am super excited that you're all going to have that benefit today as well. And Edward's going to do some formal introductions, and I think we should probably get going because we've got a finite period of time today. So welcome. I know you're all going to have an amazing session today, and over to you, Ed, to give Gillian the intro that she deserves.
As you might have told, we're actually brother and sister. So I'm never normally called Edward. So there we go. A good start. Yeah, delighted to be here with Gillian. Gillian is a very small handful of master ICF coaches in the UK. Sits on the board of the ICF, trains and coaches CEOs and boards globally. She's also the founder of Full Circle, which is a leader in coaching, and also the author of Coming Home, which is a guide to being your true self. So welcome, Gillian. I'm absolutely delighted to have you on and presenting for us. Lucy, who also gave a short intro there, is the founder of the innovative award-winning search specialist CNC Search. She's spoken for the likes of Amazon, Sony, Warner Brothers, Impacts, and is also a certified coach herself. So welcome, Lucy. Lucy will be coming back through to the Q&A and hopefully adding some answers to questions you might have there. I myself, founder of Altus Partners, we're a private equity search specialist company. And I also have been the beneficiary of sessions with Gillian. She's absolutely amazing. So really, really excited. Just to add some context to the discussion today, I'm sure many of you are aware it's Mental Health Week 2022 this week. So a really great opportunity to bring this insight session together and discuss something that has or will affect all of us at some point in our lives. And to provide a bit of tangibility to this, there's a number of studies we can look at. So Forbes had a recent study, about 1,000 employees they looked at. 62% of respondents said that having someone in a leadership role speak openly about mental health would make them feel more comfortable about talking about it themselves. Really important. McKinsey looked at 5,000 Americans and found that 37% of them were actually diagnosed with mental health issues or sought treatment in 2021. And UK Parliament also said that currently the number of people contacting them seeking help for mental health is now at a record high. But the telling one, and perhaps a good structure for today's discussion, Horton International did a survey, 12,000 people across 11 different countries. And the research revealed more C-suite executives have experienced mental health issues compared to their employees, which I thought was quite interesting. And the data also shows that many CEOs are struggling with fatigue and continual stress. So the key aspect to what we're looking at today, and regardless of what form it takes, the statistics are sobering. About 400 million workdays are lost every year due to mental health issues. So even if it's just that we look at as a stat, there's clearly a need for change. And that change starts as a top-down process. So consistent actions and pledges from the CEO trickling down to senior management, middle management, and the entry-level employees that come through. And we're going to talk about that today. So how you can cope with mental health challenges as a leader or a future leader. So either or. And on that note, I will hand over to Gillian to present for us.
All right, that's lovely. And thank you so much for the introduction and welcome everybody. It's really nice to be here. I'm really excited actually to be spending this next hour with you. So I'm going to be sharing, it's kind of, I've prepared like a little workshop. It's not going to be overly interactive, but there's going to be lots of top tips, should I say, to share with you. And by all means, please feel free to ask questions. We have the chat box there and the question Q&A bit, which Ed is going to manage. So very happy to interact as we go through, but also we can have a really big Q&A at the end if that's all right. And if at any point anybody wants specific information sending afterwards, just make a note of it and then I can get that to you through either Ed or through Lucy. All right, so I'm going to share my slides with you. Now, what we're going to do today is obviously, as Ed just shared there is a lot of research out there at the moment. I'm sure I'll be able to get you those stats as well in terms of those numbers and figures he's just shared with you. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of look at it from a bit more of a broader perspective in terms of how we can learn to master your mind. So how I can master my mind, how you can master yours. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on. So I'm going to give you, hopefully, as I said, a range of tools and techniques that you can work through as we go through these today. All right, so learning to master our mind, not an easy task to do, especially in today's environment. So this is what we're going to cover. So we're going to look at understanding the brain's evolution and what that means to you. How you are able then to manage your ego, because the brain is very closely linked to our ego. Now, we all have ego. I'm not talking about being egotistical. I'm talking about how our ego tends to serve us when we're stressed, we're anxious, we're overwhelmed, and it goes into that protective mechanism, and it keeps us in a very safe space, even though it might not be actually serving us very well. So we're going to talk a little bit more around how we can quieten the ego and manage the ego a little bit better, and then how we can reprogram our minds. And it's a term known as brain hacking. There's a couple of books out there that I can recommend at the end if you're interested, but brain hacking and how we can look at the way that our brain is made up and how we can then start to populate it with different thoughts. And then hopefully, as we've said, some tools and techniques that will help you continue to be even more successful in your work and your lives. So what's really going on? So stress accounts for 60% of GP visits, and much of that stress results from people continually thinking and worrying about the past and the future. Often we're literally not here. So we're physically here, but we're elsewhere. And we're in our heads most of the time, thinking and worrying. And on top of Ed's research, I also did some other research as well. And, you know, mental health in the workplace, kind of mental health related presenteeism is now costing businesses up to 3 times more than absenteeism. So what that means is that people are showing up for work, but they're not present. So that's a lot to do with technology, social media, overwhelming, exhaustion, fatigue. Burnout is the big buzzword at the moment. And that's causing quite a lot of problems for organizations, as you would imagine. So physically there, but energetic and emotionally not connected to what's going on in their organization, their team, or their role. 70% of organizations have reported in the last 2 years observing leavism over the last 12 months. So that's people either talking about changing their career or literally showing up for work and then thinking, oh my goodness, I can't face this, and then they log off. And so therefore there's lots of that happening. So that's a big increase prior to COVID and the pandemic. 70% staff suffer up to 3 nights a week with a sleep problem. So insomnia is now one of the fastest growing mental health related issues that we have globally. And so 70% of staff only having 3 nights a week good sleep, i.e. continued sleep, and a good 7 hours sleep. Most are waking up in the middle of the night. You might want to go to the toilet, but also your brain might kick in and then find it very, very difficult to sleep. And so 4 nights out of 7, you're not sleeping well. I don't know if that resonates with you. It certainly has resonated with me on and off over my role as an entrepreneur and a leader in my organization. So 33% of line managers are actually unaware of the potential health issues related to sedentary behavior. So we're now sitting more than ever. And I know things are starting to open up and the world is getting back to normal, but our ways of working might remain the same for many organizations. So the sense of being chained to the desk and sitting there all day from whatever time, from 7 in the morning until whenever, is not ideal for our bones, our mind, and our emotions. 12.5 million UK working days are lost each year due to mental health issues. And I don't know if anybody works in construction, but the number of people in construction industry who are suffering from mental health issues is twice the national average. And 86% of people who was involved in a survey believe that organizations are not doing enough to help them deal with work-related mental health issues. Lots of organizations are trying, and some are doing very, very well, but others are maybe just ticking the box and not really doing the depth of work that's required. Because actually, if we think about it, mental health is now being recognized as being potentially a pandemic, which is something we all need to be very, very aware of. Now, what I'm going to talk through this exercise, through this program today, is, we're not looking potentially at those who are diagnosed with depression, but there are those mental health issues. We're talking more, I suppose I want to share with you more around just our everyday wear and tear, the stresses, the strains, the fatigue, the burnout, the things that are kind of facing us where perhaps we're not necessarily on medication, although there's nothing wrong with being on medication, obviously, if that's what the body needs to kind of rebalance the hormones. But let me just go through this as we go through. And I just wanted to share with you just a little story. I've been in business now for coming up for nearly 19 years. And around 12 years ago, when the last major recession hit, I lost everything. I lost my business, I lost my home, I lost my car. I was also going through a very difficult divorce at the time, and that obviously compounded on everything that kind of had happened to me. But I didn't really have a choice, my choice was literally sink or swim, because I had a 6-year-old son, and I needed to cater and accommodate for him, and I needed to get myself back on track. And I was most probably heavily, heavily burnt out from about 7 years of a really dysfunctional marriage, but also 7 years of running a business that was actually a global business. It was a very successful business. But as the recession hit, people stopped paying. People didn't want training, people didn't want coaching, they didn't want personal development, and everything just went to a complete and utter kind of standstill. So I needed to make the choice, and I did. I sink or swim, and I decided to swim. I didn't really want to sink. And what that led me to doing then was to surviving. And the reason why I'm sharing this story with you is because I think most of us are surviving. And I think certainly from the work that I do, because on top of me being a master coach, I'm also meditation, I'm a Reiki healer, and also specialize in perfect health with the Chopra Center. And out of that, research shows that more and more of us, through our constant need to keep up, to keep going, to keep strong, that our resilience is most probably at an all-time low, and that we are kind of on that brink of we're surviving. We're not necessarily thriving. We might think we're thriving because we're doing well materialistically, but internally, we might not be thriving in the way that we should be from a healthy mind, healthy emotions, and healthy body. So let's look at some of the challenges that we're facing. And certainly I am facing these, and I teach all of this, but I certainly experience a lot of these, and I'm sure you do too. We are time poor, or we think we are time poor. High expectations due to our beautiful mobile phones that we are constantly attached to. We have very high expectations, turn around for emails, text messages, likes and posts on Instagram and Facebook and everything else. We have very, very high expectations, and so does everybody else. Which brings us to feeling that sense of overwhelmment. Sometimes we just can't keep up. Our diaries are full, our lifestyles are full. It is very difficult. And we've got very accustomed to juggling multiple tasks. And when we do that, we should most probably go to unitasking, but we don't, because, we're in an email, the phone will ring, something will get disturbed, and our mind is constantly busy all the time. So that juggling of multiple tasks actually ends up giving us, I suppose, one, repetitive thought patterns, but our brain is also initiating those repetitive thought patterns, things that we ruminate on, things that we perhaps shouldn't really need to be thinking about, but they pop back in and it becomes very present in our thoughts. With all of this, though, and feeling overwhelmed, it can lead to lack of exercise, it can lead to poor diet, poor sleep patterns, poor relationships. And it just has this kind of knock-on effect, one thing after the other. And when that starts to happen, when we start to feel even more fatigued and more tired, our beliefs kick in, our narratives kick in. And what we do, because of those repetitive thought patterns, we keep repeating the same story. I'm not good enough. These are some of mine, by the way. I'm not worthy. These are some of my past, not now. What will people think of me? Do I belong? Am I good enough? Have I got imposter syndrome? All of these things that some of you may have experienced or not are there and present within each and every one of us. But if we keep listening to those stories, and actually they don't really serve us very well, but if we keep listening to them, then what happens is our fear of change creeps in. And we're frightened. We get scared of change because it's more comfortable being in the space of where we are than taking a risk and trying to change how we think and feel, or even make some more bigger decisions about in our lives that we need to. And then when we have that, we have inner conflict, and inner conflict can lead to eventually just forget it. And you have apathy. I just cannot be bothered. I can't face it today. I'll put my head in the sand and I will think about that another day. And maybe I'll think about that tomorrow or next week when I'm feeling a little bit better. So I don't know if any of you that resonates. It certainly has resonated with me on and off. So let's understand what happens, because when we get those feelings, those repeated patterns of thinking will then lead on to repeated patterns of behavior. Our mind and body system kind of kicks in. Now, we might think that obviously our mind is one thing and our body is another, but actually they're intrinsic, they're so connected together, and they're evolving every day. Did you know that every 5 days we grow a new stomach lining? Did you know every 3 years, men, and every 6 years, women, our hair completely turns over? Every 2 to 4 weeks, our skin cells rejuvenate, and every 10 years, our skeletal system regenerates. And every year, 98% of our atoms are replaced with new ones. So how magnificent is our mind and body? But this lies the problem. It's all about renewal. But when we don't understand how we can heal our mind and body system and how we can transform the mind, then we're going to be stuck in those holding patterns. And that will affect everything we do. You've all seen President Obama when he first went into power, in his first 3 years or tenure as president, and then when he kind of continued for another few years, and then he kind of completed that, he was, looking very young, very dynamic, very fresh, very grey, very drawn. And that is the mind and the pressure that go combined with that make that person look old and tired. Now, the problem is with our mind, we have 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day. Fact. We make 35,000 decisions a day. Fact. So that could be anything from what you're going to have from your dinner, whether I take a sip of water just now, whether I put my hands like this or I put my hand on my head. All of these are decisions, as well as those bigger decisions that we need to make. The thing is, though, with our thoughts is that 95% of the thoughts that we have today, we are going to have the same tomorrow, and the same the day after, and the same the day after. We have recycled thoughts. So our mind is full constantly. So there is no wonder why we are feeling potentially blocked. We could be feeling anxious, we could be feeling overwhelmed, or just downright exhausted. And so I just want to make sure that I'm on the right slide, sorry. And so what we've got to look out for is when our body and our mind starts affecting how we feel. So let's talk about some symptoms of stress. You may feel emotional as a female, and maybe that's just me labeling myself as that in that category, but obviously I'm female. But you do get emotional, or certainly I'm an emotional person, but we all get emotional. We get angry, we get irritable, we get overwhelmed, we get anxious and fearful, and we lack at times in our own self-esteem. And when our self-esteem is affected, that then goes back and sends signals to the mind that tells us to think a particular way about ourselves. When you are showing symptoms of stress from a mental perspective, you're going to have racing thoughts. Anybody have brain fog recently? Where you start a sentence and you forget to finish it. You're racing from one thing to other. Your thoughts are constantly churning, constant worrying, difficult concentration, and really finding it quite hard to make a decision. That's when a symptom of stress might be showing up for you in your mind. Now, as we've said, the mind and the body are intrinsically linked. And so physically, you might start to have migraines, muscle tension or pain. You might get stand up from your chair when you're at work, whatever. You could be dizzy. You could find that you're having more sleep problems, feeling tired all the time, eating too much or too little. So those are going to start showing up in your physicality. I've been working with a client for quite a long time now who has been highly stressed around not able to manage his mind. And he's been on his back literally for 6 months on the floor because the pain through what has been caused through the tension of the mind is now showing up in his physicality. And that happens an awful lot. And you might also find yourself being a bit more clumsy, dropping things, just being less focused, and all that will have an impact on your physical well-being. And then finally, let's look at behavior, because again, they're all linked. If we're finding that we're overwhelmed and our mind is racing and we're tired, fatigued, as we've said, you might end up drinking more or even smoking more if that's what you're participating. Your tolerance for people will be at an all-time low. So you'll be snapping at people and you'll be absolutely avoiding things or people that you might be having trouble. And that's not good, because that leads then into more tension, more conflict, because your mind is saying, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. And then you then go and do it. And so what will happen is there'll be a disconnect between your mind and what your heart wants and what you believe. And so as we go through this, I'm going to show you some tools and techniques how we can maybe shift some of these thinking patterns so that you can have a more balanced life as we move forward. Now, the problem is, and this is why all this is happening, so a bit of history for you, if that's all right, for a moment. 2 million years ago, our human brains were around 400 to 500 cubic centimeters in size, and we ate vegetation, so a very plant-based diet. And I know more is being focused now on rejuvenating that plant-based approach to living our lives. But, you know, we were in that kind of cavemen, cavewomen era, and that's what we did. And that was absolutely fine. But what happened was we started to introduce protein into our diet because it was a more effective way to obtain what we needed, I suppose, for survival. And what happened is, over these last 2 million years, our brain has increased. In fact, it has more or less tripled in size over those 2 million years. Now, that's fantastic because we need abstract thinking, we need communication, we need mathematics, language, creativity. We need all of these to survive in the world that we live in today, in this human body. But it's no wonder we have a huge amount of problem in terms of the amount of information that is coming in through our minds. So as we've said, those 60 to 80,000 thoughts don't stop. So as one thought is leaving the brain, another one is immediately coming in. And so this is constant stream of thoughts. And as we said, 95% of them that you'll have today, you'll have tomorrow. Some of those you'll be conscious of. A lot of them you won't be. The only time when you are conscious of those thoughts, it is because it is turned into a repetitive thought pattern, or you have had a new experience that has brought some new activity into the brain. And then over time, those experiences, the ones that we, I suppose, are more memorable, the ones that have perhaps emotion attached to them, will then become memories. And those memories are the things that we hold on to. Now, some of those memories we have are going to be amazing. They'll be lovely memories of things that we've experienced from when we've been young to where we are today. And some of those memories won't be as lovely. They might be more painful, more difficult. But those memories are then stored. It's like an imprint on the brain. And when we're stressed, when we're overwhelmed, we're triggered. And I suppose the chemicals that lead from the body into the brain then can saturate different aspects of our brain. And I'm going to tell you a little bit later about the 3 different aspects of our brain and how we can control those to actually retrain and to hack and mind hack a little bit more effectively. So ideally, we want to live a life that is free of thoughts, but we can't be free of thoughts because we have 60,000 to 80,000 of them a day. So how do we learn to manage them? And one of the ways is to understand that we live 2 lives, with the life in our thoughts, and we live the life in our experiences in the present moment. Now, most of us live in the past or the future? And that's a question I'd just like you to reflect upon for a moment. Where do you spend most of your time? Do you spend your time reflecting on the past, good or bad? Or do you spend most of your time thinking about your future? Because most of us don't spend time in the present moment, in the right here, right now. I got asked a question years ago around what time is it? And I was like looking at my watch, obviously, like you would do. But actually the time is here. The time is the here and the now. And that is the only time that we have. The past is the past. The future is the future. And we do spend a lot of time, and thank you, Lindsay, for your comment, whittling about the future and thinking about what we could be doing or what we should have done in the past. But the only time to live is the here and now. And that's a very difficult concept in today's society and the culture of how we live. So freedom does come, though, when our life in thoughts diminish. And we allow our experiences of the present, so the here and now, that if we allow that to predominate, then we can start to clear and start to unpack and choose how we want to manage our mind, because most of us are managed by our mind rather than us managing the mind. And we have a choice. You can choose to allow your memories and your thoughts to manage you, or you can control your memories and your thoughts. I know which one I prefer to do. I'd like to manage my thoughts and memories rather than them manage me, but they have managed me in the past few years. So freedom does come through learning how to balance thoughts and in the present moment. Now, I'm sure most of you have heard of meditation and mindfulness. That's one of the ways to do it. Another way is to learn to breathe properly, and we're going to touch upon these a little later. There's other stuff like walking out in nature, just focusing on what you're doing, unitasking, not multitasking. All of these things can help start to make a difference. Now, as we know, our thoughts are not going to be absent, but what we want to do is to be able to navigate ourselves through these thoughts. And when we can do that over time, and through mindfulness practice more so than anything else, we can choose, do we want to hold on to this thought? Do we want to stay in the present moment? And we all have that choice. And as we've said, it's about retraining the brain. The brain is the most powerful muscle that we have in our body. It is genius. It's ridiculously clever and intelligent. But it can keep us in our patterns of behavior and our thought patterns. And it does that because it's clever and it's intelligent. It likes to link information. So just as an example, you might have had an incident, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, maybe your boss said something to you, or a family member said something to you, and it triggered some emotional reaction within you. You didn't like it. You now arrive at work again, and you're in a different environment, completely different job. You've moved on, you're 5 years more evolved than you were 5 years ago, different person now than what you were. Yet you get triggered in the workplace or by a family member again, and you feel exactly the same as you did 5 years ago. And you question yourself and you think, why is that happening? I don't understand. Why have they said that to me again? You know, I thought I dealt with all of that, and here I am again feeling the same feelings as I did before. And the answer is quite simply, is that the brain is linking that past experience into your current experience. Now, we're not asking the brain to do that, because actually these two incidents are separate. You're not who you were 5 years ago. You're who you are now. But the brain likes to link things. It likes to create patterns, and it likes to make sure that it's telling us, look, Gillian, these are the same situations when actually they're not. And so one of the ways to create a freedom of thought is to genuinely ask in the moment, is this the same experience as the one that I had 5 years ago? And if it's not, which it won't be, because that was then, this is now, then you can look at this incident as a standalone incident, not as a series of collective incidents. Because when it becomes a collective series of incidents, you become overwhelmed. You might then fall into, woe is me, or why is this happening to me? This is not fair. I thought this had been sorted. You might want to blame other people, and it will kind of literally railroad you into a whole series of emotions that, quite honestly, you don't want to. So what we're talking about here is being more conscious in terms of what you are doing in the moment. And that's how you can help eradicate the thoughts ruling you. So what is the antidote to stress? Because stress is there in our brain all the time. Stress shows up in our body. As we know, it shows up in our behaviors. 60 to 80,000 thoughts, repeated patterns, all of this kind of thing happens all the time. And so one of the ways to look at this is to understand how we react to stress, how we react to anxiety, and how we react to constant thoughts and repeated thinking and patterns of behavior. Now, most of us, as I said, because our brain has increased, tripled over these last 2 million years, most of us now are very accustomed to being in flight or fight response mechanism. Now, this is not something that we actually think about these days, but all them 2 million years ago in the Dark Ages, when we're cavemen, cavewomen, then, you know, this kind of cortex, the front cortex of the brain, is where flight or fight or even freeze belongs. This is in the prefrontal cortex of our brain. So from a neuroscientific perspective, that's where it sits. Now, when that kicks in, and it was great all them years ago because we needed to survive. You know, we needed to, if a mammal was coming at us and to try and, you know, kind of steal our food or whatever, attack us, then we would immediately go into fight mode, or we would flight. We would run away. Same if somebody was to come to attack the tribe, all of those years ago, we would have done fight, flight. We could have even done the freeze bit, which is more or less that we wait in anticipation until it's all quieted down, and then we decide what our next move is. Now, what happens though, is that was great all them years ago, but it's still here in the front cortex. There's nothing we can do about it, but this is triggered all the time in every area of our lives, all the time. And what happens is when it's triggered, our heart rate increases, our blood pressure increases, we breathe shallow. So we do this kind of shallow breathing just from the nose down to the upper chest, and it's rapid. Our production of stress hormones increase, such as adrenaline and cortisol, which is not good for being in the body for too long. Decreased levels of anti-aging hormones, so we look older, like Obama. Weakened immunity system, and our blood pellets don't clot in the way that we do. This is all scientifically evidence backed up. Now, we are in a very, very high state of alert all the time. That's because of the thoughts, it's because of the rise of abstract thinking and everything about the way that we're living our lives. Technology, and realistically, is a big impact on that. And also, our recall memory has shrunk. So our brain has shrunk. In the last decade, our recall memory has shrunk by 4%. This has just come out of Harvard Medical Research at the moment, due to Google, because we're Googling everything, we're on the internet all the time. We don't need to retain information the way that we used to. And so all this has an impact on what's happening within our physicality, our emotions, and our mind. So when we're in this place, we don't really want to be in this place for very long, but we're used to it. So we can now, our tolerance level is higher for it. So that, you know, we survive, we're surviving. We're not necessarily always thriving. And so what that will brings on is anxiety. It will bring on insomnia. It'll bring on premature aging. But it's also been proven it'll bring on heart disease, and it'll bring on more serious illnesses, diabetes, cancer, and a range of other different things it will bring. And that for me is quite frightening, that the way that we live our lives will have an impact on whether we get a more serious illness or not. Now, some of that is genetic, and, you know, it's been proven again that 5% of cancers are genetic. 95% of cancers, heart disease and diabetes are brought on by our lifestyle choices and where we are in our mind, which is hugely scary. So we want to be careful about that. And that's why it's important that we need to manage, but also master this beautiful gift we have of our mind. So one of the ways to do this is that we tap into our software. So we have software in our phones, our computers, software is everywhere, but we have also software in here, in our brains. And we also have these three things called action, memory, and desire. So I'm going to give you a really silly example, but hopefully this makes sense. And again, you can apply this to yourselves today and beyond. So just assume that I had never had a cup of coffee before. And my colleagues at work are saying, Gillian, you must have this cup of coffee. It's amazing. It's going to make you feel good. You're going to be vibrant. You're going to get a buzz from it. It smells great. It tastes great. It's amazing. But I'm a tea drinker. This is the truth. I'm a tea drinker. But, you know, have coffee instead. So I'm like, no, it's okay. I'll have my cup of tea. It's fine. Anyway, the next day when I'm walking to work, I pass this coffee shop. And because my brain recalls the conversation that I had yesterday with my colleagues, it kind of starts to spike an interest. And my curiosity kind of peaks up, and I'm looking at the coffee shop. I can see people coming out. They're all smiling. They've got their cups of coffee. And I think, okay, do you know what? I'm going to go in. So I take action. I go into the coffee shop, get myself a cup of coffee. I take a mouthful. Oh my God, they're right. Wow, it tastes good. I smell it. Oh, it smells lovely. And then I go to work. And then later on in that morning, I'm buzzing. I'm getting through all my tasks. I've got loads of energy and I'm on cloud 9. And I go to them, you're absolutely right. Now, because I have affirmed that action by taking action, and then I have reconfirmed how it felt, I now have created a memory. And that memory is now installed in my software of my brain. So I go home, sleep the next day, I walk past the same coffee shop, and I don't even think twice because my brain kicks in and my desire to have another coffee is there. And so I go in. And every day for the next 10, 15, 20 years, however many years it might be, this is my program. This is a new habit that has been literally formed within seconds because I took action, and that action created a memory, and that memory created a desire. Now, this is just coffee I'm talking about. But where else can this show up in your life? It can show up around your diet. It can show up in your kind of alcohol consumption. It can show up in what you believe about yourself. It can show up in all sorts. So it shows up in the 4 cornerstones of our kind of well-being, which is our mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual aspects of our makeup. And so action is karma in Sanskrit, memory sanskara, and desire vasanas. And this is the way that we live our lives. This is the way that our mind is functioning. Anybody feel when they're exhausted, you've had enough, I'll just reach for a piece of chocolate, or I'll go get a sweet treat in the afternoon, I've worked really hard. Or Friday night comes, I'll just have that extra glass of wine because I deserve it, or that gin and tonic, whatever it might be that you drink, or that beer. And you just have one. Well, you know, I've worked really hard this week, so I'll just have the bottle, you know, and that's how habits are formed. And it can be the same as going out and buying materialistic things, the same as, you know, the way that you communicate in your relationships. It has an impact on everything we do. But as soon as we're in agreement with it, it becomes our reality, just like that. So we need to learn how to unpack some of this software and really decide what is serving me well. What is working for me? What makes me feel happy? What brings me joy? What makes me feel well? Versus just doing it because it's what we know. Because the one thing that our brain does, it keeps us in the same repeated patterns. And so what I wanted to share with you is how this then affects our nervous system. So we're going to have restlessness and tension in our body, in our physical body. As we've talked about, difficult sleeping, a range of other things. From an emotional state, we could feel overwhelmed, fearful, anxious, disconnected, which we've talked about. And from a mental, you know, we're going to find it difficult to think straight, even empathize, or even connect. And that's because the blood flow to the brain is not getting to the parts of the brain that it needs to. And we create this hypervigilance state, this irritability, and we can either withdraw, or we could literally switch off. And those are things that you might experience yourself, or you might find other people around you doing it. So we have a choice. We can have brain 1, brain 2, or brain 3. And there are 3 kind of patterns of brain activation, as it says. The way that we think, we feel, and we make decisions. So brain 1 is, I'm going to call it the inner Godzilla, if that's okay for the moment. And that's where we're in this constant freeze, flight, or fight mode. And brain 2 is where I would call it our inner teen wolf. If anybody's seen the teen wolf, where you kind of come into something, and you're very much this is about personal reward, gratification, praise, recognition, acquisition. And these are kind of, as you can see, kind of below the line versus above the line. And when we're below the line, we are mindless. Okay, and we're very unconscious of what we're doing, but it's these patterns of behavior. It's what we know. It's our routine, a routinal base. I would call it as our reactional way of living. But if we move above the line and we move into our inner sage, I was going to call it for a moment, which is basically around mastery of this beautiful mind, then we can be more mindful and we're more conscious. Okay. And so I just want you to think about, where do you spend most of your time? Are you in your inner Godzilla, fight, flight, or freeze? Are you in your teen wolf, your gratification, your reward, recognition, control, power, all of that kind of thing? Or are you in more your inner sage? I think we spend most of the time in a lot of it. And there are times when we'll dip down into other things, but just think about that for a moment for yourself. Where are you? Because what happens is, if we are under the line, below the line, and we're in this self-preservation, we are kicking into our stress hormones. And that's the brain does. It produces those stress hormones. So cortisol, adrenaline. If cortisol is in our body for too long, it resides around our belly. So if anybody's got a big belly or a swollen belly, inflammation, that could be the fact, might be excess weight, but on average, it is caused through the storage of cortisol in the body, which is not good. So we need to get rid of that. So when we're in this stage, this kind of stress hormone is kicked in. We're in self-preservation mode. And that's about pain, loss. We're kind of trying to protect ourselves. We could be feeling powerless. There could be other scenarios going on. When we're in the reward and brain 2, when we're in the reward and acquisition phase, we're in more of that pleasure gain. We're quite competitive. We want popularity. We want power again, and we feel a bit more privileged, and we want more status about things. And so that kicks in different chemicals in the brain: stress hormone, dopamine, all which are okay in small doses, not if we have too much of them. And what happens is, with our brain, we have 2 sides to it. We have optimism and we have pessimism. So the right side of the brain is the optimistic side of the brain. Okay. So, the left side, should be right. So the left side is the feminine, and the right is the masculine side. Okay, so we both have both sides, masculine and feminine side to the brain. So the left side is optimism and the right side is pessimism. So we are all born with bigger sides, left or right side of our brain. So you might hear people say, well, he's just a right brainer. He's, that's my left brain that needs to kick in. You might hear people say things like that. But when we open up to our left side of our brain, then we're welcome to new ideas, new opportunities. We feel hope, confidence, trust. We say yes to a lot of things because we're optimistic about life. When we have more pessimism in our life, then you find that you contract. You focus on what might go wrong. You're in protective mechanism. You say no to quite a lot of things. You're mistrusting of others. You doubt, and you're in fear. And we really don't want to be in, we want to try and get the balance right. The whole idea is to get the balance right between these 2 things. I'm whizzing through this, but I'm going to send you the slides afterwards so you can have a look at these afterwards. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we don't fall into drama, because when we're in our drama, feeling overwhelmed, we don't want to take responsibility, we're not sure about how we can move forward, we're kind of wanting people to come in and rescue us and save us. This is what we're saying subconsciously. We're not really aware of this behavior. But when we're in those states, we want something to happen, but we're not able to move forward. I spent quite a lot of my younger years in a position where I was comfortable being uncomfortable. So what I mean by that is that I knew I needed to make changes, but I didn't have the confidence or the belief in myself enough to make some of those changes. And that kept me in this kind of drama triangle where I felt most of the time a little bit of the victim. And then I persecuted, which I blamed other people. And all I really wanted to do was somebody to come and rescue me. But actually, the thing is, no one is going to rescue you in the way that you want to be rescued. Only you can do that. And so when we spend time in this place, that then can lead us into our ego. And we have 3 different aspects of our ego. Just looking at time, I'm just conscious that most probably got 5 minutes left. So I'm just going to kind of just go through this. Is that with our ego can control our mind. And so what we want to do is we want to basically tame the ego. I'm going to flick through these. So we want to learn the difference between being right and making a point. There's nothing wrong with a strong argument or thinking a particular way, but the ego is quite big and it can learn and it can kind of manage us quite a lot. So what we've got to do is we've got to realize in those moments of how can I change my thinking? And I'm just going to get to some different slides. I'm just stop sharing for a minute. How can we move from different thinking? Is that we need to move beyond our past conditioning and give ourselves the gift of choice, because the brain can shift. You can go from your Godzilla, Teen Wolf into Guru if you believe you can. And what we need to do is we need to nurture the brain. And we do that by making sure we have choices. So what can we do? And I'm going to share my slides on this one. So what can we do to do this? And I'm going to finish in a few minutes and then Q&A. We can top up our tank. We can look after our self-care. We can meditate, we can exercise, we can eat well. Ideally plant-based food or fish, but maybe not too much red meat because that affects the chemicals in the brain. We can invest in our own personal and spiritual growth, and we can kind of correct the balance between giving and receiving. And go back to that question, where do you spend your time? In the past or the future? And instead choose more mindfulness practices, such as breathing, such as present moment, being right here, right now, and deciding in the moment, do I need to deal with this thought just now, or can I leave it and let it go? Because one of the things that we don't do is we don't look after ourselves in the way that we might look after other people. Again, this is another signal of the brain. We're very much more judgmental, more harder on ourselves than we would be on other people. And my view is that to manage your mind accordingly, you have to be compassionate and kind to yourself. And these are some of the ways that you can do it. So retrain the brain, replace your software. Literally this weekend or later today, write yourself a list. What are the things that are serving me well? What are the things that are not serving me well? What are the things that are not working for me? And then try over time to eliminate them. That might be toxic relationships. It could be too much work. You might just not be able to say no. You're a yes person. I'm not talking about optimistic, pessimistic brain. I'm meaning that you just don't want to let people down. You have a high level of responsibility. You just might be overwhelmed. It just might be too much on your plate. Look at what you can reduce and make small incremental changes. Don't tackle everything at once because it's not going to happen. So that might be more around your lifestyle. It might be more around your working hours and getting that balance right. It might be more about creating a better bedtime routine so you can get more sleep. It might be the fact that actually you need to offload before you go to bed to get all that, to get those right hours of sleep. Whatever it might be, think about the software. Think about your patterns of behavior. Think about your thought patterns. What needs to change? Because there's always room for improvement and there's always room for change. And one of the ways to do that is if you're ever feeling overwhelmed, and this is the last slide, if you're ever feeling overwhelmed, I would encourage you to just do this stop technique. It's the most simplest but most powerful thing you'll ever do. Is in the midst of fight or flight, stop, pause, just press the stop button as though you're slamming your feet down on the brakes, and then take 3 deep breaths. And when you've calmed down, when you've stopped that shallow breathing, you've stopped palpitating, whatever it is that's going on, sweating, all that kind of thing, observe yourself. What was going on in this moment? What was it that made me trigger that response? And once you know, you can then proceed with awareness. And the key thing is to give yourself compassion and kindness rather than judgment. And so finally, think about what you can accept, what you can appreciate, what affection do you need to give yourself, and what attention you need to be paying attention to. So accept, appreciate, affect, and attention. Stop and then do this, and then hopefully you will have some techniques that might be able to help you. I ran out of time, so I'm very sorry, because this topic, I could go on forever about it. But if you do want the slides, you want more information, let the guys know and I'll send them to you, and then you can do the exercises in your own time. But thank you for listening.
Gillian, you were absolutely exceptional, as I knew you would be. And I have to say, it feels very much to me that this was part 1 of a 2-part conversation, because we're just sort of getting into the nitty-gritty. And I know that for me, that power of the pause that you were talking about has been, I think, is something that I am working to utilize a lot, and something that I took away from my coaching training with you. So I have some questions, a couple of questions, and please do share them. And maybe Gillian would be kind enough to come back. And just before I ask your question, I'll ask a couple of questions. I know Ed's got a couple too. I would like to let everyone know that you do work with corporates. Yes. And your work is really needed. So if you want to reach out to Gillian, we're going to send your contact information for both corporate work, and additionally, I know that you're also an executive one-to-one coach extraordinaire. So we'll make sure that everybody has that. And I can see the flood of appreciation for what you've just shared, Gillian. So I have a question here, which is, what happens to us when we are in our ego, and how is that related to how we manage stress?
Okay, yeah. So what the ego will do is it will try to protect us. So what happens with the ego, it will give you those repeated signals around how you should be in those moments, because it goes to what's familiar and what's known. So it's that kind of sense of familiar territory. So if you're wanting to try and change something around maybe anxiety, stress, overwhelm, whatever it might be, what will happen is the ego will keep you in that holding pattern, because it wants to keep you safe and keep you cozy in your comfort zone. Now, what we've got to do is to kind of move beyond the ego, but it is very difficult because it makes things easy for you. So it will give you signals like, you don't need to do that, you'll be okay. You know, and it will just give you those kind of more nurturing messages that actually are not really nurturing in the long term. And so when overwhelmed and when stressed, you'll go immediately into fight or flight. And that's the ego coming in. And that's when it says, right, you're not going to do that, because that's, you know, it tells you don't do that because that's not going to work for you. And what it also gives you is those messages of those kind of self-belief, self-esteem messages, which is, you know, so for example, just say that you wanted to change jobs because you've just had enough where you are, for it as an example. And it'll say to you, well, you know, you might not get a job anywhere else. You might as well stay where you are. You know, so it'll send those signals to you, and that's not really what you want. And all it's trying to do, the ego, is to keep you safe, but actually what it does is hinders you. And so what happens with ego, it kind of stimulates the fear kind of emotion within us, and that then will stop us for trying to make those changes. So what we've got to do is try to overcome the ego. It's a bit like a goodie and a baddie in a movie. You need to kind of win, you win your ego over by giving yourself love and compassion rather than the fear, if that makes any sense.
Makes complete sense. And Ed, I know that looks like you've got a question before Sorry.
Yeah, no, there's just a couple of individuals asked. I thought there was a very interesting one. Does it actually take 21 days to actually form a bad habit? And does this apply to stopping negative thoughts you might have had for years? Yeah. And I think that's one that probably resonates for all of us.
So the coffee example, it takes literally a nanosecond to create a new habit, good or bad. But it does take 21 days and beyond to change that habit. So you see a lot of things about 21 days to change your life and things like that. Obviously, it's going to take a lot more 21 days to change your life, but it will take 21 days. So if you think about it, if you start on day 1 and you work through to 21 days, then you're still going to be very conscious of the counting of the days. When you go, my philosophy is that if you go beyond that to 30 days, so 21 to 30 days, after 30 days, you stop thinking about the days. And it just becomes integrated to part of who you are. But the problem is, if you have a wobble within days 1 to 21, you have to go back to day 1. Start again.
Gillian, in terms of moving from that subconscious, that middle part of our brain, into that conscious part of our brain, apart from that stop technique, is there anything else that you can do to help move that, shift into that raised conscious decision making?
Yeah,
and perspective.
So I don't know if anybody's heard of this is a really simple technique, it's box breathing. So where you would breathe in for the count of 6, you would hold for 3, and you'd breathe out for the count of 6 and hold for 3. It's a really good breathing technique. So 6 breaths in, you hold for 3, 6 breaths out, you hold for 3. This is really good because what happens is it opens up the vagus nerve. If anybody's heard of the vagus nerve, the vagus nerve runs from your brain, obviously, all the way down into your body. And that vagus nerve will actually reduce your stress and anxiety when it's open and the air is flowing freely through that vagus nerve. But because we're like this all the time and pent up, it gets clogged and it gets kind of, so instead of being, as you know, it's not really a massive, but imagine it can expand. But when it's kind of contracting like that, it stops those positive brain signals. And so what it does, it makes us feel really, really not very good about ourselves, but it will also then affect our well-being, overall well-being. So that's just a really simple technique that if you can open that vagus nerve through the box breathing, then that would be really useful. The other thing, if you haven't done meditation or mindfulness practices, that's another thing I would encourage. Just breathing for 2 to 3 minutes a day is the greatest gift you could give yourself. Obviously, we breathe when we enter the world, and we breathe, our last breath will be when we leave this world, but we don't breathe properly. So learning to breathe properly is really important.
Moving from that,
I find myself doing the breathing exercises you're talking about. And
it does calm you. Yeah. Sorry, Lucy.
Gillian, you were talking about that right and left side of the brain and that ability to tap into optimism, and moving from fear into faith is probably one of the most life-changing things we can ever do, isn't it? And are there any, I guess, tips from how you move from that place of fear into faith?
Yeah, so I think for my view is that when there is any situations where fear is very present, I think the key thing is to do the breathing. So that would be the first technique. Do the breathing, stop, take a moment, do all of that. And then ask yourself, how do I want, what is the right decision for me now? Because most of us go to our mind to tell us what to think. So we think, we feel, but our belly is what we know. And I would always encourage everybody to drop down into their deepest part of themselves, which is their belly, your gut. Because you'll answer with, oh, I think I should do this, or I feel I should do this. But these are still being very governed by the memory and the mind. And so when you go to what you know, and that's the question, so what do I know about myself in this situation? What do I know I'm capable of doing? That's the bit that will really help.
There's another great question, Gillian, here. How do we get out of apathy or numbness when you're not conscious of how you feel? How do you make a start on coming back to yourself? That's a really good question.
Very good question. Well, one, most probably get some support, like a coach or something like that. That's not me selling, but I just think it's good to talk to somebody else actually to help, because I think you need a safe space sometimes to unpack why you're feeling the way that you're feeling. But I think if you're not doing that, then I would pose yourself a series of questions around being true to yourself, which is You know, what would being true to yourself look like? What would it feel if you was true to yourself? Because I think when we get numb, it's because we are most probably playing roles and taking on responsibility that sometimes perhaps doesn't belong to us. That's just a very generic answer, and there's more to it, obviously. But I think if you could give yourself a moment to even journal and reflect on what's going on for you at this moment in time, you might be able to start to unpack some of those things and question yourself, why do I feel this way? What's keeping me in this holding pattern? Because I think once you know what it is, then you can be able to proceed with more awareness.
But what's definitely true is, as you were saying about that rescuing part, if you can't think your way into a new way of thinking and acting, you can act your way into a new way of thinking and being. And I think it's that piece, isn't it, that this is action related. You do need to be willing to do the work and get conscious about what's going on for you and how you can get on your own side, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because what I've learned over the last kind of 10 years of being involved more in wellness work is that, you know, your body, and this is what Donna's just saying, that, you know, your stomach, but your body never lies. And I think we ignore what our body is telling us. You know, when you feel tired, I'll just carry on, you know, whereas actually you should most probably pause and rest. But we don't pay attention to the signals that our body is giving us. Those headaches, whatever we might be getting, or the you know, the fog or whatever it might be in our brain when we're not working on full pelt, then that's our body telling us, slow down, you know, take a moment, do something different. But we don't. We push on because our brain tells us to push on. So we really need to start listening to a different part of ourselves rather than just the brain.
Yeah, I think that goes back to Brandy's question, actually. Yeah, the stress symptoms and the body reactions are the same with being overwhelmed too long. So really, really interesting. Gillian, I think we could probably go on for hours being candid, because it's so, I mean, all of the presentation was amazing. Some of the statistics, I mean, I didn't know about anything about the stomach lining. I mean, that's one to yeah, if you ever wanted a reason why you should be listening to this stuff. But amazing sort of presentation. I agree with Lucy. I think there's probably a follow-up in here as well, to give some of these techniques that I think are brilliant to work through in your own lives. But really appreciate your time with it. Lucy, thank you for providing your insights as well. We will follow up with the recording and all the links and stats and all this other stuff, and the presentation. And if you need contact details for Gillian, please do reach out and we'll be happy to share those with you. So thank you very much, Gillian. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you very much.